Let's hand it on off to Alexandria Hoff, live in Washington on the Iran negotiations. Alex.
Hey, good morning to you both. The U.S. and Iran plan to hold talks this weekend in Islamabad. Vice President Vance leading those, as President Trump says will remain in the region until a lasting peace agreement is made. He wrote this, quote, aircraft and military personnel with additional ammunition, weaponry, and anything else that is appropriate and necessary for the lethal prosecution and destruction of an already substantially degraded enemy will remain in place and around Iran until such time as the real agreement reached is fully complied with. Fire does remain fragile, as you said. Iran claims that it has already been breached by Israeli strikes on Lebanon targeting Hezbollah. The Iranian-backed militant group vowed to continue attacks on Israel. In response to that, the U.S. and Israel both say Lebanon was not included in the ceasefire, a misunderstanding, according to the vice president.
He said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states. If Iran wants to let this negotiation fall apart in a conflict where they were getting hammered over Lebanon, which has nothing to do with them and which the United States never once said was part of the ceasefire, that's ultimately their choice. We think that would be dumb, but that's their choice.
Iran's foreign minister, he objects to that, writing this: the Iran-U.S. ceasefire terms are clear and explicit. The U.S. must choose ceasefire or continued war via Israel. It cannot have both. The world sees the massacres in Lebanon. The ball is in the U.S. court, and the world is watching whether it will act on its commitment. State media also reporting that Tehran has closed the Strait of Hormuz. This is a major point of contention and of disagreement right now. The U.S. and allies demand it remains open. Guys.
Fly Fresh in Washington. Alex, thank you. Let's bring in Chief Strategist of the former U.S. Army Special Forces member Jim Hansen. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. We got a little bit of clarity yesterday when it comes to the starting point for these negotiations with White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Listen here.
The Iranians originally put forward a 10-point plan that was fundamentally unserious, unacceptable, and completely discarded. It was literally thrown in the garbage by President Trump and his negotiating team. Many outlets in this room have falsely reported on that plan as being acceptable to the United States, and that is false.
Okay. They reported that was basically an Iranian wish list we can all throw out in the trash, but there are still a whole lot of daylight between the two sides here. The United States, Israel, and Iran. So given what we know so far, which is not a whole lot, how do you think negotiations are going to go this weekend?
Consider about a ceasefire is it's not a peace deal. You know, if we had all of this hammered out beforehand and the deal was ready, we wouldn't have to negotiate one. So I think the idea of a ceasefire is to stop shooting long enough that we can go ahead and start beating, the actual plan into shape. There is a lot of room between the two positions. I know the Iranian 10-point plan was wish casting on their part, and they didn't expect a lot of that. But they need to realize that President Trump is not going to cave or compromise in any way on the most important things: no nukes, no missiles, and no funding terror in the region. They're going to agree to those, or there will be no deal.
And also, Jim, there's an issue and really up in the air with Iran saying they're blocking the strait because of Israel and Hezbollah. There's also this situation with the tolls where Iran is charging tolls for ships to cross. And then President Trump yesterday said that this could ultimately be a joint venture between the U.S. and Iranians. So where do things go with the Strait of Hormuz?
It needs to open one way or another. President Trump, I think, is giving the Iranians a little bit of hope, and say, hey, maybe we'll do a business deal together. That's 100% his way. Whether that stays in the end, I think it would be unpleasant for some people. But if we get to the point where the rest of the important things, the actual dangerous things, are agreed to, then a toll for ships going through there is not the worst thing in the world. I think that'll try to be negotiated away, though. It's not something we want to make as a precedent.
One thing that came out of the press briefing yesterday was that Caroline Leavitt confirmed that Iran had indicated that it would turn over its stocks of enriched uranium. Big deal. What do you think about that?
That's the biggest deal. I mean, they have, near bomb grade uranium, and we can't allow that. That's an intolerable situation. They're somewhere between 10 and 14 days from breakout with that. So we can't allow them to keep that. That was kind of the whole point of this. If they don't agree to give that, then we're going to have a big problem. But I don't see any reason for negotiations to happen unless they have actually agreed to do that. That would be the number one thing. And then everything else after that is a secondary notion. So that would be a tremendous win for the world and the reason President Trump launched Operation Epic Fury.
Yeah, and on that point, endless opinions and criticism from both sides when it comes to how this war should go and where it's going. But I think one fundamental question that everybody should be asking themselves is if the United States is safer now as a result of what has taken place so far. How would you answer that question?
We are undoubtedly safer than before this began. The Iranians had a much greater capability to project power in the region, to cause trouble, to push their proxies, to do things. Now they're basically trying to stay alive. They have no legitimate military weapons. All they have left are asymmetric things like suicide boats and other ways, to cause major trouble. No doubt about that. But no Air Force, no Navy, no legitimate threats that I think the military has done a tremendous job in neutralizing. And that right there is a major step forward for security in the region and for security around the world.
Yeah. And going back to something we were talking about previously, can you help us understand why the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah is still ongoing when Israel is supporting the ceasefire with Iran?
The problem is that Hezbollah is right on Israel's border. The Litani River was agreed to be a dividing line, and Hezbollah is not supposed to be south of that. The government of Lebanon and the UN are supposed to enforce that. They failed to do so, and consequently, Hezbollah has their rocket launchers and other things right on Israel's border, shooting across that border and driving Israelis out of their homes. That's an intolerable situation from them. Now, that's a proxy of Iran, but it's also a completely separate issue between Hezbollah and Israel. And they have every right to go ahead and push them back far enough up north that they can't shoot rockets and destroy the lives and livelihood of the Israelis on the border.
It's going to be a big weekend and a very important 2 weeks. Jim Hansen live for us. Jim, thank you so much.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.